Our next speaker is Mr. Sylvain Gaylor. Mr. Gaylor is the Managing Director of Specialty Metals Company and Chairman of the Board of Ust-Kamenogorsk Titanium and Magnesium Plant, a leading producer of titanium sponge and magnesium located in Kazakhstan. Mr. Gaylor is a native of Strasbourg, France, and a graduate from Strasbourg University. He will share his perspective on titanium sponge from a producer's perspective. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Sylvain Gaylor.
Good morning. So I will speak today about the world titanium sponge supply trends. The presentation will be as follows. Firstly, some presentation of new development which is happening today on the titanium sponge supply. Then briefly, we'll show you the world titanium sponge supply in terms of production, then current production level at each producer, US imports, titanium sponge production capacity versus actual production, then inventory level, and as a conclusion, we'll try to give you some expectation for 2019. So what are these new developments affecting the titanium sponge supply market? Firstly, like you've heard from David, there's been a strong demand for TiO2 pigment for the last 2 years, and there are no signs that the demand for pigment will slow down next year, in spite of a slowdown last summer. As you know, raw material required for TiO2 pigment represents at least 95% of the demand of the world titanium sponge feedstock supply, and the consequence for the increased demand for pigment will decrease the share of feedstock for titanium sponge producer. Sponge producer will have to compete against pigment producers to have access to their raw material. There has been as well operational problems at titanium feedstock suppliers, which usually happens at high level of production, and the consequence has been even more pressure on the supply of feedstock. TiO2 pigment prices have increased steadily over the last 2 years, allowing pigment producers to pay more for their feedstock. Sponge producers have not experienced such increases in the price of sponge, and as a result, had to absorb by themselves the increase of feedstock prices. TiO2 pigment production has reached record level of production in China, and consumption of feedstock has increased. Chinese sponge producers have experienced feedstock supply issues because of the price increase. As a result, they have priced themselves and their sponge out of the market. Due to new and tough environmental policy in China, Chinese pigment producers are now using high-grade feedstock for their production of pigment, and by doing so are now competing for feedstock against sponge producers, not only in China but worldwide. Since the second half of 2017, demand for titanium products in Southeast Asia and China has increased at a fast pace, especially in the chemical, oil and gas, energy and defense markets. It is the emergence of a regional market demand which is showing different trends than the US and European markets. Demand for titanium in Russia has also increased, and sponge production has reached almost full capacity. Sponge inventory have decreased at consumers and producers worldwide but particularly at melters in the US. The increase of demand in the regional market has had for effect to decrease inventory at sponge producer and trigger an increase of sponge production. CI sponge producers have reacted quickly to this new demand and have increased their production by 22% over the last 2 years. So now on the world titanium sponge supply. So firstly, a picture of the world titanium sponge production. The current slide shows that the world consolidated sponge production started to increase in 2017. In 2017, sponge production increased by 5,251 tons compared to 2016. World sponge production is estimated to increase further in 2018 to 197,700 tons, which is an increase of 10,278 against 2017. Sponge production in Saudi Arabia is not included in our slide because its product has not come yet in the market. Nevertheless, production of commercial titanium sponge and shipments are planned to start in 2019. It is not a coincidence that world sponge production increased in the last 2 years by 15,529 tons. In the US, large demand for titanium in 2017 and 2018 has been covered from existing inventories, which are now at a low level and are being replaced. According to the USGS, sponge inventory in the USA decreased by 11,900 tons during 2017 and is continuing to decrease in 2018. So now to regional production. Firstly, the CIS sponge production. The current slide shows an increase of 4,000 tons in 2017 against 2016. In 2018, it is forecasted to increase by another 11,200 tons. The increase of world titanium sponge production is coming from the CIS producers. In 2018, Russia will increase its production by 6,200 tons and Kazakhstan by 7,000 tons, but Ukraine decreased by 2,000 tons. US sponge production seen on this current slide shows large fluctuation after 2015 due to the ATI Raleigh sponge plant shutdown. And the ATI Raleigh plant had been running at about 6,000 tons per year. Timett is remaining the only sponge producer in the USA, and production at Timett has decreased in 2016 and 17 because of high inventory. In 2018, Timett is forecasted to produce about 10,000 tons. North America remains the largest importer of sponge in the world because most of the US smelters depend on imported sponge to produce ingots. Sponge imports volume have always been higher than US production of sponge. In 2017, US imports were 23,565 tons. Japanese sponge took the lead on imported sponge with 19,170 tons in 2017 against 15,849 tons in 2016. In 2017, sponge imports have increased by 7,374 tons compared to 2016 because inventory had decreased by 46% and ingot production in the US had increased by 25% in 2017 against 2016. first 7 months of 2018, according to the US Census Bureau, import statistic of sponge into the US had slightly decreased by about 4.5% against import in the first 7 months of 2017. It shows that imports are stable and melters are still dependent on imported sponge. Sponge production in Asia increased by 2.35% in 2017 at 123,922 tons against 121,077 tons in 2016. The increase in 2017 comes from an expected high Chinese sponge production. Chinese sponge production in 2017 was 72,922 tons compared to 67,077 tons in 2016. The increase of sponge production in China of 5,845 tons is basically due to higher demand from the domestic market in China, particularly from the chemical industry, shipbuilding, oil and gas, and aerospace industry. Production capacity in China was increased at two sponge producers, Luoyang Shangru and Shaoyang Baisheng. Average usage of sponge production capacity in China in 2017 was 80%, which is quite high. At the same time, import of sponge into China was 344 tons in 2017 against 3,182 tons in 2016, which is an increase of 20.8%. In 2018, demand for milk products from the domestic market is continuing to be strong, and Chinese sponge producers will be under pressure to supply their melters because of high cost of feedstock, and it remains to be seen how they will be able to face the demand from their customers. Sponge imports should increase, but will only cover a fraction of the domestic demand. Japanese sponge production in 2017 slightly decreased compared to 2016, but shipments remain high, showing that Japanese sponge producers were decreasing their inventory. So now on world sponge capacity. Total world sponge capacity was 255,300,000 tons at the end of 2017, compared to 250,300 tons at the end of 2016, which shows an increase of 5,000 tons compared to 2016. This is due to the increase of sponge capacity in China in 2017 of 5,000 tons. The average range of sponge capacity worldwide used for production of sponge is 77%. Russia has the highest rate of usage of its production capacity at 95%. If demand continues to increase in China, sponge capacity will need to be increased again, provided Chinese sponge producers can purchase reasonably priced feedstock. As you can see from this slide, capacity utilization is high at most of the sponge producer, and only Kazakhstan and Ukraine have a large production capacity left. Now on sponge inventory. From 2013 to 2016, US inventory remained at a high level because of long-term contract, with minimum intake coupled with a decrease of demand. At the same time, price of scrap was competitive, and therefore usage of sponge was decreased in the melt. In 2017, ingot production increased, and the ratio of sponge used in the melt was higher because there was a willingness to decrease inventory. This situation resulted in a decrease of inventory in 2017 of 11,900 tons compared to 2016. According to the USGS figures, the decrease of inventory in the US is still going on. As you can see on this slide, inventory decreased by 3,000 tons between Q4 2017 and Q1 2018. Outside the US, we can see, as shown on this slide, the same situation happening. The inventory decreased by 50% in 2017 compared to 2016. With imports into the US at over 23,000 tons in 2017 and likely to be the same in 2018, inventory at sponge producer in Asia will be decreasing. As a conclusion, I would like to say that taking into account the development in the titanium sponge supply as well as the decrease of inventory at the melter, it is likely that the trend that we have experienced in 2018 will continue in 2019. According to our calculation, there is still an operational reserve at sponge producers, excluding China, of 26,550 tons of sponge, which could come into the market. World sponge production is likely to increase in 2019, but the rate of increase will be lower than in 2018 because the ramp-up could take up to 6 months. It is interesting to note that the aerospace is not the only driver of this increase compared to previous years. Because of the emergence of regional markets, melters located outside the US are not using as much cold hard furnaces as US melters and therefore are more dependent on sponge and scrap, which will encourage sponge producers to continue increasing their production. The main issue for the sponge producers will remain to source their feedstock at a reasonable price in order to maintain the titanium sponge market stability. Thank you for your attention.